The next video here that we couldn't watch in the classroom is talking about something that relates to our study. So we'll watch it at some point down the road, but essentially what we're looking at here is the idea that those aquatic macroinvertebrates that we looked at last couple of weeks were very sensitive to stuff in the water, or things that were missing in the water that they needed. We didn't talk about the details, but we talked about how it's kind of a thing. And we're gonna look at lichens, which have the same kind of thing going on, only they don't live in water, they live in the air. And it turns out many lichens are really sensitive to air quality issues. They can tell us if too much bad stuff is in the air or if not enough good stuff is in the air. And we will look at that down the road. We're not gonna look at that today, but we'll talk about it next week and part of the week after. What I want to do is give you a quick overview of what I look for to identify the lichens that we are going to be looking at. And some of you probably found, Katie Phillips was here yesterday, some of you probably found that our identification is going to be a little blurred. It's really hard to tell some of these things apart. And it's not really critical that we get everything absolutely right. So that's why I said, when the person asked, like, oh, is this an edible lichen? I'm like, no, don't assume that our identifications are 100% correct. We're gonna get it wrong sometimes, and that's okay. We're just gonna look for the big things. We'll do our best. And here's how I tell them apart. This first lichen, and this one is one that many of you probably didn't see yesterday because it's a little bit less common, although we have some specimens of it. I have some specimens, so you'll all get a chance to see it. It's called Ramelina menziesii. And you don't need to know how to pronounce it. You can also refer to it as fishnet lichen, but I'm going to use this. I use the scientific names for the lichens because that's all I can remember. And part of the reason for that is because people will sometimes refer to different lichens by the same non-scientific name. And so I just don't mess around with that. I'm always going to use this. This is the one that I want you to know, and this is the one that I'm going to use. So you're going to need to get used to hearing it and be able to recognize it. The big thing to look for with Ramelina menziesii is that it makes an interwoven mesh. Like if you look at this lichen, it's like it looks like what would happen if you took a piece of paper and you kind of cut holes out of it. And all the other lichens that we're going to look at are either going to be flat sheets, they don't look like there were holes cut out of them at all, or they're going to be strands. They're not going to look like something that is like interconnected like this. It might sort of have that appearance to start with, but then when you look up close, when you look under a dissecting scope, you'll see, oh, that's not the case at all. So this is Ramelina menziesii. I will also refer to this often as Ramelina M. And you can too. Ramelina M is just fine. We are looking at two organisms that have the same first name. One is Ramelina menziesii. The other one is Ramelina farinaceae, and that one we'll call Ramelina F. So you don't have to memorize the whole name. You don't have to memorize the name at all, but you gotta be able to use it. So for most of you, that's gonna mean memorization. So this is gonna be your key identifying feature here. The next species is the other Ramelina species. So this is Ramelina farinaceae, and I will call this, and you can too, Ramelina F. And Ramelina farinaceae, I'm not even gonna use this other name. You can if you want, but I'm not going to. Ramelina farinaceae is, it doesn't have that same, it's not interwoven, it's not net-like. If you look, each piece of Ramelina farinaceae is a long strand, and there's a couple pictures here. This one here is kind of what it looks like from a little bit away, and the problem with this is it looks like a lot of other stuff too. When you look at it a little bit closer, and especially if you look at it under a microscope, first of all, you'll see it's this one right here is the one we're looking at, and it's different from this one back here. This one is more round. This has kind of like round branches. This one has more flattened branches. There's another one that we're going to look at that has more flattened branches too. So what we're gonna look at in this one specifically is that it has branches with sharp, thin, pointed tips. Many of you will not be able to see this unless you put it under a dissecting scope. If you look under a dissecting scope, you'll see that the tips of this thing are long and thin, and the branches might go out for a while, but at the very end of each branch, you're gonna see one single long tip. That's the key that it's Ramalina F. There's another lichen in our group that looks very similar to this. And the difference is largely something that we're gonna see at the ends of the branches. So if you just look at it, you're gonna be like, I don't know which one this is. You're gonna have to get a microscope and you're gonna have to look at it really carefully, okay? And then, okay. So this is Ramalina F, and then our next one is Evernia prunastri. And Evernia prunastri, so again, the common name doesn't really matter. This is the one that looks a lot like Ramalina F. And Evernia prunastri, we're not gonna look at any other ones with the same first name. So I'm gonna just call this one Evernia. And you can too. And the difference between Evernia and Ramalina F, but once you get to know them, you'll actually be able to figure out without a microscope. But at first, you're gonna need a microscope to be able to see them. And what you're gonna look at are these tips. And the tips, the branches, have rounded, split tips. That's the big difference. So when you look under a microscope, what you're gonna see is that it kind of branches off into two, like this, and then it might branch off into two again. But at the end of each branching, you're gonna see it kind of looks like I think of it as looking like a bone, like a femur bone, right? Where two bones come together, they have that sort of two-lobed end. That's what Evernia kind of looks like. You kind of see these two rounded tips. You can see the larger splits here, but if you look at a microscope, you'll see even these smaller ends also have two tips. It never goes to a point. It always ends in these little rounded tips. And that's the difference between Evernia and Ramalina F, okay? So Ramalina M is the net one. And I have some samples of that, and you guys will be able to look at them today. Ramalina F and Evernia are really hard to tell apart. You have to look under a microscope. And then once you've looked under a scope a bunch, then you'll be able to kind of dial it in, okay? And, all right, and then the next one is Usnea. And this particular species is called Usnea subfloridana, but we only have one that has this first name, so we're gonna call it Usnea. Although there actually are a bunch of Usnea species, and we're probably gonna see a bunch of them, and I can't tell the difference. Katie can, but they're not always gonna be here, and they can't necessarily do it without like equipment. And so, so we're just gonna call it all Usnea. Most of it will be this Usnea subfloridana. Some of it will be some other kind of Usnea, and we don't really care. It's all Usnea to us, yeah. And what you're looking at with this one is that it's real fuzzy. So when you compare Usnea to Ramalina F or Evernia, the first thing you'll notice is, oh well, it looks like the hair that's on a hairbrush after somebody's combed their hair. Like you pull it out and it's just this like mess. That's Usnea. The other two are more flattened and they're kind of more discreet, and they don't get all tangled up. If you look at the branching, you'll figure out why. Because with Usnea, the way the branching works is that it's got this like triple level branching. Each branch has sub-branches coming off of it, and then each of those sub-branches has sub-branches coming off, and they get all tangled up. You can gently pull them apart without damaging the specimen. But if they're just like growing together, or if you like dump a bunch of branches into a bucket like we did yesterday, then it all just get tangled up immediately. So if you want to separate out one of the Ramalina species, it's a lot easier. You could just kind of pull, like gently pull, and you can start seeing the individual strands of it. This is Ramalina M. This is Ramalina menziesii, the net-like one. And then if you are trying to pull together Usnea, and I don't have any up here, but when you're trying to pull apart Usnea, it's just like clumped together. Like it's almost impossible to do it without breaking it. Okay, so that is Usnea subfloridana. The next one is the easiest one to identify once you've seen it. And this is called Lobaria. The full name is Lobaria pulmonaria, but it's the only Lobaria species that we're going to see, so we'll just call it Lobaria. And this one looks like a big green leaf. It's kind of like wrinkled, but it's big and it's bright green, although this time of year, we don't always have this much rain, so sometimes this time of year it's been dried out long enough that it's kind of brown. But for us, for the next at least couple of days, we're going to see that these look bright green. Okay, they'll be brown if it stays dry for a couple of weeks. They'll turn brown again. But when it's been wet like it has been, they're bright green, and they're large. So I have some of that here. It's this one, and you can see it. This one has started to turn a little brown. It's still mostly green though, and you can see this is big, right? Like way bigger than those other ones. Like this is all one piece, and it's kind of wrinkled on top. It looks like, you know, like frog skin or something like that, but it doesn't look the way a leaf normally does, but it's around the same size and shape as like a really big leaf. Okay, this is the easiest one to identify. This one, its common name is lungwort. Because it's so easy to identify, this is a reliable name. So unlike the other ones where people mess them up, this one, if you say lungwort, we'll all know what you're talking about. I will, other people will as well. I'm still going to call it Lobaria. The last two are unique from the others, so you won't mix these up with the other ones, but they're often kind of difficult to tell apart from each other. So one is called Hypogymnia physodes, and the way I'll refer to this one is just hypogymnia. So you don't have to know that second part. And the regular name doesn't matter because nobody ever uses it, and it also has the scientific name in it anyway, so it's not saving you anything. And the key piece here is when you look at it, especially under the microscope, you can see that it actually is sort of inflated. It's got a top level and a bottom level, and they go together, and they're actually separated by air. There's air in there. They look like they're inflated, and they really are. So it's tube-like branches that look like they've been blown up with air. And if you cut with a sharp knife, you'll see that. You can cut it, and you'll see that it's hollow on the inside. And this is really similar to one of the other ones that we're going to look at. The other one that we're going to look at, though, is flat. It doesn't have that hollow look. And it's by far the easiest way to determine these is by looking at a known specimen. So I have a few specimens of this hypogymnia up here. Many of you, when you look at it, you're going to be like, I can't tell the difference between that and the other one. Sometimes it's easier if you get it a little bit wet, so we can soak some of these specimens in a little bit of water. They sort of soften up and get a little bit bigger, and you can see some of the distinguishing characteristics. But the other one that looks a lot like this is called Parmelia sulcata. And Parmelia this is the only Parmelia species we're going to see, so I'll just call it Parmelia. And as always, I'm not going to worry about the common name because it's got the scientific name in there anyway, and nobody uses it. This is flat, so it looks really similar superficially to the hypogymnia. It's kind of pale gray, and it doesn't have long strands. It doesn't look like a big leaf like Loberia. It's not all fuzzy and brushy, but the difference is that they're flat. So you don't get that sense of, oh, this looks like it would be hollow if I cut it and looked at the inside. And the other thing, and you can see it really clearly here, and you can see it really clearly under a microscope. You won't always be able to see it really clearly without a microscope. It's got these ridges, and the ridges extend across the entire surface. This picture isn't all in focus, but you can kind of see where these ridges are. And they're, they're not regular shapes, they're not like squares or rectangles, but they sometimes sort of look like they've got four sides to them, like this. So it's like depressions with ridges in between the depression. When you look under a microscope, you can see it really clearly. Okay, so those are our lichens, and there's a lot of them. And I'm gonna change trajectory. You didn't know this, but we were gonna do something a little bit different. And you know what? As I go through this, I'm realizing I want you to continue practicing that first set of skills, which is I would like you to be able to just simply identify the lichens. So I'm gonna stop our video.